Today. This afternoon session will be on Open Innovation in Healthcare Collaboration. During this panel discussion, our distinguished speakers, who are experts from the health technology ecosystem, will share their views on the acceleration of fresh ideas into commercialization through collaboration. Now, I would like to introduce to the audience Slido. So Slido is an app that you audience can participate in our panel discussion by posing questions through this app. It is now my pleasure to introduce you our moderator of this panel, Kelvin Tan. Kelvin is the Program Director of NUS Enterprise, who leads the Corporate Partnership and Business Development in Smart Systems Institute. Kelvin, please. Thank you. Today, we are honored to have with us 4 distinguished speakers. First, Mr. Marcus Tan. Mr. Marcus Tan is a medical doctor and co-founder of Medilot Technologies. He is an advocate of distributed ledger technology in healthcare and has been invited to speak at various panels on this subject. He is also a clinical lecturer at the National University of Singapore and a principal investigator in industry-linked medical research. Dr. Tan, please. Secondly, we have Tamsin Grolich-Smith. Tamsin is the Chief of Smart Health Leadership Center of NUS Institute of Systems Science. She has more than 20 years of experience in integrating risk communications, change leadership, and social innovation practices. Tamsin, please. Third, we have Dr. Ruben Ng. Dr. Ng is a professor at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy at NUS. He specializes in data analytics, behavioral insights, and policy innovation. Dr. Ng, please. Last but not least, we have Craig Cooper. Craig is the current managing director of AO Technology, which connects leading surgeons and scientists in the musculoskeletal field. With over 20 years of experience, he specializes in the healthcare innovation field. Craig, please. Ladies and gentlemen, let us begin our session.
Right. Afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for coming to our session here on Open Innovations in Healthcare. We are privileged to have here 4 experts representing different views. First, from Dr. Marcus Tan. He is a director and co-founder of Medilot, a startup which is very successful in getting a lot of attention because of blockchain and how it's going to help the patients and as well as the healthcare industry in making things more transparent. So I'm going to invite him first to share 10 minutes of his work, and then we'll have the other experts to follow through with their 10 minutes introduction of their views on this topic. So, Dr. Tan.
Thank you, Kelvin. Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Marcus, co-founder of Medilot Technologies. And today, I just want to share a bit with you guys about how blockchain can impact healthcare. Now, that's a very broad topic, so I'll just try to keep it short and summarize my main points. So one of the first things I always ask my audiences in talks is this question: what is the value of your health data? I think very few of us actually do pay any attention to this. To most people, the value of your own health data is limited to what you want your doctor to know. You want your own health data, individual health data, to be complete and secure. I think that's the basic requirements that we have for our own private health data. Now, beyond that, I think health data is also very valuable to certain organizations. organizations such as government, hospitals, and even insurers who want to price their premiums accurately. Well, one person's health data is useful to that person himself. But once you get large enough data sets, you get 20,000 people, 30,000 people, that's where it starts to get interesting. And before we get to how do you get large data sets of clean health data, because that's almost impossible right now, let's talk a bit about what are the problems that are plaguing us with electronic health records nowadays. So if you went to a hospital now and you wanted access to your whole health story, that is an almost impossible task to do in this day and age, even in Singapore, which is one of the leading centers in the world for electronic health records. So health data is very fragmented, and data silos exist where different EHR vendors are not able to talk to each other. And this leads to medical errors and inefficiency. The second thing is that patients don't really control the flow of their health data. If, let's say, you wanted to enter a research trial and halfway through you want to withdraw your consent, or you wish to alter that consent. In this day and age, it will take probably 3 months, lots of headache for yourself, the doctor, and the administrator for you to do that. Is there a way that we can then allow the patient to have direct access to his data and set access permissions to his data? That's another one of the challenges that we're talking about today. And this leads to the third point, which is our health data system now is not primed for big data analytics. For the data scientists in here, I'm sure you know there's this common phrase, rubbish in, rubbish out. Cleaning data takes up about 80% of the work of any predictive modeler. And with these fragmented data silos, it's almost impossible to find good structured data where you can perform efficient data analytics on large, clean data sets. So just a scale of what we're dealing with, the global EHR market is projected to grow about 10 billion in the next 10 years to $38 billion. And again, I've alluded to these points earlier. These are the things that patients want. You know, they want privacy, they want their data to be secure, they want to be able to access their data from anywhere, and they want to be able to use their data easily. For example, you want to be able to send your data to insurers directly to claim insurance, rather than going through a circuitous process of administrators, medical reports, and doctors. And again, companies want access to large data sets to get to generate insights for strategy and business development. And at the same time, governments do want to facilitate this data flow, but the data must be secure and it must be private. So how does blockchain come in, or how does Medilot come in? By allowing data to be put on the blockchain, we actually allow a seamless access to data to the patient from any health institution that they visit. And on top of this, because patients hold their own private keys, they actually have control over who can see their data, who can edit their data, and they can set fine or granular access permissions as to how their data can be used. And this is all the more important in the light of the recent PDPA, GDPR regulations that have been all around the world. And on top of this, now that you have solved the problem of unstructured data, you can now have a data abstraction layer on top of it that allows advanced analytics to be done to have predictive models that allow doctors to tell you, for example, your risk of cardiovascular events in the next 5 years for your personal risk. And because the data points are all decentralized, there's no single point of failure. So these are just some of the technologies that we're using. They've been developed in-house by our tech team with one of my co-founders, Professor Uy, who is chair professor of in computer science. And we've taken almost 3 to 5 years to develop these 3 layers of technologies. In the interest of time, I'll just skip past. And for those who are a bit more familiar with blockchain, we're using a dual blockchain architecture where the informational layer is run on Hyperledger++, which is a modified Hyperledger from IBM, and the transactional layer is the ERC20 token layer, which is running on the Ethereum network. Now, there is incentive we need to offer incentives to both hospitals and patients to want to, provide data for the data requesters. And this is just a very simple chart showing the flow of information and the flow of tokens that we'll issue on the ERC20 network. So in exchange for tokens, patients and hospitals together, who both co-own the data, will allow organizations to come into the sandbox, which is restricted and safe and anonymized, to use this data, generate insights, and then take these insights out. So they're able to take the insights out, but not the data itself. Just want to quickly show some of the collaborations that we have. We have some significant Chinese partnerships in a few provinces in China, Shandong, Zhejiang, Shenzhen. And we were one of the first blockchain companies that was pre-seeded by NUS seed grant. And we're working closely with the NUHS cluster to make this a possibility. Just a quick introduction to my team, Prof. Ui, whom I've mentioned just now. Dr. Ngiam is the Group Chief Technology Officer of the National University Health System. Prof. Zhang is from Beijing, from BIT in Beijing, and Jiang Wei is my CTO. So we have a deep stack of tech developers. Some of them are here today. Thank you. Right.
Okay, thank you very much, Marcus. Okay, now we have another expert, I would say. Of course, she's a good friend of mine, Tamsin. She heads up the Smart Health Leadership Center at ISS NUS. And she will share with us some of the integrated care initiatives she has experienced and how it could link to the whole environment of open innovations in healthcare. Tamsin, please.
Thank you, Kelvin. Afternoon, everyone. Thank you. There's so many people here, and I'm really proud. You always think at the end of the day you've all given up and got tired and gone home. Thank you for turning up. Very briefly, when Kelvin asked me to come along and join this panel, I thought, okay, open innovation for healthcare. And that really resonates with what happens in my center at NUS. I run something called the Smart Health Leadership Center. You can see there our vision is very grand. It's to transform the future experience of health through data, technology, and innovation. Okay? So innovation underpins it, but we bring it all together. We try to help people working across the whole ecosystem to work out the role they can play in that future and how they can access the benefits of data technology and design or innovation to realize impact. But I want to draw your attention to something in the corner, which is this bit, collaborate. From the outset, I thought to have collaboration underpinning what we're doing, because I think that's the only way we really find those breakthroughs. And when I presented that to the management board in our institute, they said, but why? Why collaboration? I said, well, it brings so many different benefits, and even if we can't always bring a financial dollar sign to that, I think it brings the impact in terms of achieving our vision. So I'll come on to that a little bit more, but first of all I thought, hey, this is what I do, let's have a think about this. What does innovation in healthcare look like? Yeah. And when we ask people things, they normally talk about AI. AI, everyone talks about these days, yeah. Everyone's shaking their head, we're bored of this now. AI, we just heard a great example about the use of blockchain. There are so many, I think, interesting applications for blockchain for health, not just to do with electronic medical records, but when we start looking at integrated care, which is somewhere I'm very interested in. But yeah, we could be thinking about AI. We could be thinking about how we start understanding our DNA better, precision medicine. We could think about augmented reality. Surgeons actually can have a look at what the body they're operating on in an entirely different way. These are the things that get all the attention, yeah, the glamorous things, the headline stories. But some of it's not so sexy, but still impactful. How about the quantified self, yeah? Smart health wearables. Is anyone wearing a wearable today that might be helping them monitor their health? No, one hand, two hands, seriously guys, come on, okay, a few more, okay. I know, I must admit, my Fitbit stopped working, I didn't replace it. Anyway, so I thought about this. Yeah, these wearables, they're really new, aren't they? Really modern technology, but are wearables for health really that new? Who can guess what this is? I'm welcome for anyone to shout at me, nicely or kind of badly. What do you think this is a picture of? Glasses, yeah? 16th century leather spectacles. Apparently, the eyeglass goes back to the 13th century. That's a wearable to improve health, yeah? But we think the wearable, I won't go back, we think the wearable is all about modern technology. I think I've totally broken the machine now, it won't go forward or back. Hey, okay. Something has to go wrong. Actually, the quantified self is also not a new concept. There's a lot of data going back at least to the early 70s about how people were quantifying and monitoring themselves in order to achieve health improvement. But actually, of course, when digital technology became so accessible to the consumer, it leapt forward, and that's what we know, yeah. How about telehealth, telemedicine? Yeah, that's really changing things. That's really modern, yeah. This is a company, in fact, I first came across the CEO of VC at an NUS Enterprise event. They're providing, if you can read the small writing, 13,000 feet above sea level in the Himalayan mountains, Apollo Hospitals has just set up one of the highest telemedicine stations in the world, yeah, providing access to healthcare for people that live in very, very remote parts of the world. This is brand new. This is innovation in healthcare, yeah? Yeah? But it builds on things that aren't so much considered to be innovations in healthcare. Apparently, the first ever telephone call, yeah, this is a photo of Alexander Graham Bell, yeah, is assumed and claimed to be the inventor of the telephone. Apparently, that first ever telephone call was really a telehealth call. He'd spilled acid on his trousers, and he was calling his friend, Thomas Watson, to come and help him. Whoa, okay. So that wasn't designed to be a healthcare innovation, but its first use case actually was one. And without the telephone, where would some of our modern inventions and innovations be today? Likewise, monkeys in space. Is this a healthcare innovation? Well, back in the 1940s, NASA were putting monkeys out into space to try to test telemonitoring at really remote levels. They didn't want to risk sending an astronaut out into space without thinking about how they might monitor and provide care over huge distances, yeah? We learn from different industries and apply the learning. They also ran a lot of test sites at on remote parts of the Earth to apply the same learnings. And I found this is an interesting link back. It's what VC is now doing. As well as providing healthcare up in the Himalayas, they're providing telemedicine video counseling at the International Space Station. Although if anyone's watched the film Gravity, you realize it's not much happening up there, really. But you see, we build on each other's innovations for real impact, yeah? And the way I'm very open and collaborative, and I love the transparency aspect. And for me, I work a lot in transformation programs. The biggest problem we find there is that transformation is change, and people don't really like change very much. That's why change management consultants can make a lot of money, yeah. People feel that change is uncomfortable. They're uncertain about the benefits. When we use an open innovation and a collaborative design approach, we start to build people into what we're delivering. So some of the change management challenges get addressed. But the other reason that I always feel that collaboration and innovation is important is this first point. It helps us frame the problem. We all become very entrenched in what we're doing at work, yeah? Our heads are down and we're focusing in on meeting KPIs and delivering deadlines, and we think we know the answer and we just need someone to help us deliver it, or we just need some funds, or we just need some technology, and we'll get there. And sometimes it takes the fresh pair of eyes to come in and say, well, why don't you do this? And then we get defensive and explain why. But when you start bringing enough fresh eyes together, you start to look at your problem in a different way, and you start to raise the question, how might we do it differently? And that's sometimes where we find the breakthrough solution. It also can help us to share resources. I consider myself really lucky that I've always been really under-resourced in all the work I do, yeah. I always feel that I've had to really cobble together things because I never have enough money. But that's great, because then we kind of use that frugal innovation approach, but we also look at how we can work with other people to find a breakthrough. It gives us a kind of innovation boundary, or this is how I try and make myself feel better about it. But genuinely it helps, and when we start to say, okay, let's share our resources in order to achieve the common goal, then it makes it a lot easier, yeah? And again, the common goal is an important part of that. I believe that with every project, you can find a common goal, even when your motivations are very different. I've just come from a meeting this morning with two very, very different organizations. We're looking to sign a collaboration agreement that will allow us to research solutions that will transform healthcare. Yeah, that's what we believe. That's our mission. But each partner has a very, very different motivation. One partner sells technology, a big technology company. Of course, they want to look for use cases. How else can I use my technology? The other provides healthcare services. How can we improve our healthcare system is their motivation. My motivation is how can I use this experience to allow my students to learn on the ground, to enhance their career prospects and to help them actually design those future solutions that will change the future of health. So there's a win-win, and if we're very clear, and we had a really brutally honest, upfront conversation to say, let's be honest guys, what do we all want out of this? And if you have that conversation up front, finding the win-win is easier, and designing the sustainable partnership also helps. Crowdsourcing is also a really valuable part. It's kind of a building on the fresh eye perspective. When we crowdsource inputs to our design aspect, it helps us to create sometimes some more innovative solutions. But if you think, I mean, we've been involved in some of NUS Enterprises hackathons. We run our own smart health design-a-thons. There are multiple wins to be gained from that. If you think about an organization that opens up its data sets to a bunch of strangers and says, here, you can play with this data, here's the design challenge, show us what you can come up with. And if that winning team takes away some money to invest in a business that may well go ahead and change things, there's mutual gain to be had. So we'd always try to look for these win-win solutions. And likewise, I mentioned the conversation I've had earlier, when we look for designing from the outset something that works for each party, we're more likely to find sustainable impacts. Finally, my final point on the benefits is around an ecosystem effect. I don't believe really any of us can do anything on our own. Yeah. So when we want to have a big impact, we need to look at how we can bring different players in and help them play a role in that. So I think using an open innovation approach helps us to stimulate a broader ecosystem. Just a couple of examples of organizations we've been involved with. I'm not sure if any of you have come across Healint. It's a Singapore-based startup. Anyone who's ever suffered from migraines, if you haven't heard of Healint, download their Migraine Buddy app. Healint basically crowdsourced migraine data from users around the world in order to try to design better insights in terms of how we manage migraines. So this is collaborative innovation. They also work with some of our students as well, so we provide some resource in that. Our HealthMate, a local startup funded through the JFDI program, they look at how they can bring different partners together through a platform they've created in order to try to tackle problems that are faced by multiple people. This was actually started by someone who said he knew his father needed healthcare treatment in India, but his dad was confused. His dad wasn't going to get the treatment he needed. The doctor was telling him to follow up on medication, but the dad wasn't following up. The son, who lives in Singapore, was sending him money, but the dad wasn't spending it, and so on. So they designed a platform whereby everyone can monitor and engage and direct one another to help achieve the better health outcome. Very briefly, this is a project we've been working on, as Kelvin has mentioned, an integrated care project where we put Alexa into seniors' homes to see if Alexa could play a role in influencing their health behaviors. We were looking at seniors who are socially isolated and recently discharged from hospital. When they're socially isolated, they're less likely to look after themselves, and we're exploring the role not only of a data sharing platform, but also of using an Alexa in their homes to prompt them. The reason this project was really interesting is because we brought multiple players together, none of us in competition with one another, but all trying to achieve a solution from a different angle. There are challenges, and I think we may come on to this. Intellectual property is always the big one, so we really need to address some of those issues up front. Data sharing, open data sets are awesome. I would love to see more of them in Singapore, but of course we always are throwing back issues around concerns about privacy and regulations. And then really, I urge you, the final point here, spend time working out how to create your partnerships, because the more work you put into that up front, the better the benefits along the way. Okay, thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Tamsin. So from the viewpoint of a doctor, Dr. Marcus Tan to Tamsin talking about transformation, working with startups and ecosystem. I'm going to introduce now Dr. Ruben Ng. He was my favorite lecturer when he was teaching the subject on geriatrics and in School of Singapore University of Social Sciences now, SUSS. So he's got to share with us what he's doing in data analytics from a public policy point of view and his consulting experiences, right? So he's now in the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy. So please share with us what you have.
Thank you, Kelvin. Thank you for that generous introduction. So good afternoon. Thank you for staying. My name is Ruben Ng. When I spent a few years in the UK and the US, nobody could pronounce my surname or last name because it has no vowels, NG. So they thought it was an abbreviation for no good. But I told them, no, it's not no good. It's nice guy. So just a quick introduction about myself. I'm a psychologist by training, but a very undisciplined psychologist because I've been applying psychology in so many different areas. I first started out my career as a researcher in the US, working in the university and also for the National Institute of Aging, looking at healthcare issues for older people. Then I came back to Singapore and tried analytics consulting. So we help companies start up an analytics practice, of which about 70% of my clients were governments around Asia Pacific. The rest were, the banking, oil and gas, and so on. So it was very interesting because that's where I learned what made projects successful. And I realized that what made projects successful wasn't really the science of AI or the science of technology, but also the art of analytics and the art of implementation. So I'm going to share some stories later on. Then after doing consulting for a while, I thought I wanted some government experience. So I was double-hatting in the Singapore government. Half my time was in the Smart Nation program office, and the other half was in a strategy group within the Prime Minister's office looking at whole of government policy making. Because aging, for example, is not just under the purview of Ministry of Health, right? It could be aging mobility, that's Ministry of Transport and stuff like that. So the sort of strategy group was looking at whole of government policy making. So after that, I decided to move back to academia. That's where I am at the School of Public Policy, teaching public policy innovation, public management, and so on. So I apologize, I don't have slides because I was a big procrastinator. So I procrastinated until to this point that I don't have slides. So I tried to take an analytics approach really to study why I was procrastinating. So I even did a procrastination log. Okay, so every time I procrastinated, I tried to find what are the triggers of my procrastination. I did that for 100 days. But because I'm such a procrastinator, I haven't analyzed the data yet. Okay, so I'm just going to share a few points right now, just my thoughts on innovation in healthcare. I think you would know that in Singapore, we are transiting from healthcare to health. So we are focusing not really on treatment and acute care, that's still very important, but we are now moving towards health and preventive health. But sometimes preventive health programs don't work or preventive messages don't work simply because we assume one size fits all. So that's why Tamsin and Marcus mentioned about precision medicine. These days we are thinking about not just precision medicine but precision prevention or personalized prevention. And one of the ways of thinking about that is really to think about how can we segment society better so that then we can target their preventive efforts, programs and policies and even messaging to those target groups. Okay, so I think that's where innovations in healthcare is moving towards really precision prevention. The second lesson I learned about doing all these kind of projects is that we shouldn't be method silos. Marcus talked about data silos, but sometimes I see method silos as well. Let's say I'm an analytics professional, I'm a data scientist, then everything becomes an analytics project. It's like if you're a hammer, everything becomes a nail. It's great that we are specialists in our areas, but we need to think about a toolkit that we are building so that when we move from problem to solution, along the value chain from problem to solution, we can use different tools to solve the problem. So one of the best stories to illustrate this is Target. Target supermarket. Any of us heard of Target supermarket? Yeah, it's huge, right? Huge in the US. So in Singapore, the biggest one we have is maybe NTUC Extra. Target is really NTUC Extra on steroids because it sells so many different things. They even sell Converse shoes, but Converse not Converse All-Star, but Converse One-Star. They have product differentiation. But the lesser known fact about Target is that they are one of the earliest users of analytics. And when they use analytics at that time, so this father in the Midwest of the US received a mailer of coupons for his 16-year-old daughter. But he got very furious because the mailer of coupons for his 16-year-old daughter contained nothing but coupons about pregnancy. Okay, so he got really pissed off, right? So he called up the Target manager and said, look, my daughter is 16 years old. Why are you sending her coupons of pregnancy-related products? Of course, the Target manager was quite sheepish and said, look, I'm so sorry, let me find out what's going on. 2 days later, the Target manager called back the father. Before the Target manager could say anything, the father said, I guess Target knew something I didn't know. Apparently, his 16-year-old daughter is pregnant. Target knew, but the father didn't know. How is that possible? Okay, so later on, we learned that Target actually does a lot of analytics based on what people search online and what people buy. Because in Singapore, right, every family has an NTUC link card, for example. But down there, they make every person in the family have a Target card if you're above 16 years old. Okay, so that you can actually track based on what you buy, what life stage you're at. So from a science perspective, from an analytics perspective, it's wonderful. I mean, it's amazing they managed to achieve such accuracy. But from the art of implementation perspective, did it work out? It didn't. Okay? So that's where they realized analytics could give us the insights, but it may not tell us how to implement properly. That's where they thought about, we need to bring in behavioral insights, for example. So behavioral insights tries to A/B test which methods to scale up. So behavioral insights have also brought interesting applications. They found in Target supermarkets and Walmarts in the US that fathers who tend to buy diapers will also pick up some beer after that. So if you go to US supermarkets, you realize the beer is now besides diapers. They also found out from behavioral insights perspective that if the shelves, the sales section, the shelves are messier, people perceive it's cheaper. So that's why I was so surprised why when I went to Target, people are messing up the shelves. People working there are messing up the shelves rather than putting things together. Okay, so after that, they realized from this coupon perspective, if you give coupons, if you give only all coupons that are relevant, and if people feel that they are targeted, they actually won't buy. So they will only buy if they don't feel they are targeted. So these days, the coupons, the relevant coupons are interspersed with nonsensical coupons that you don't need. So people don't feel targeted, they actually go and buy. Okay, so the second point I want to make is, yes, we may be data scientists, analytics professionals, but we need to bear in mind what other tools can we use so that we can best implement our analytical insights. Okay, the third point I wanted to make is really the importance of design thinking to understand the needs of people. Recently, my students and I were working, looking at the area of disability mobility. How can we make Singapore more friendly for disabled people? The immediate thought when we think about disability mobility are people on wheelchairs. But when we did the design thinking workshops, user journeys, we realized that we needed to expand the sort of market size or the scope of the project. Because if you think about disabled travel, it isn't really people on wheelchairs, but it's also parents who have babies on strollers. It's also caregivers. We interviewed 2 caregivers whereby the caregiver is also on a wheelchair and taking care of an older person who's also on a wheelchair. So these are all, we really need to expand the scope of things, of who needs our solutions. And one of the ways to do that is really design thinking. Okay, I'm coming up to my time now, but I just want to make a couple of points. I think from a government perspective, governments are very good at doing what we call scenario planning. We do scenario planning 2035, 2040, and so on. So we know what's coming into our shores. But sometimes we feel, governments around the world feel that they are still reacting to things when they come, such as the sharing economy comes, we start to react to it. But somehow there's a disconnect because we know they are coming, but we haven't really prepared for it. So governments around the world, and I'm also suggesting to them that we don't just do scenario planning, but we also want to do what we call policy sandboxes. Because we know what's coming, we experiment in a controlled environment, for example, healthcare innovation or fintech. Our central bank is doing stuff like that. Relax the rules within a controlled environment, see what works when new technologies come in, then we scale up the policy, but because we've tested it. Okay, so I think scenario planning is good, but it is be done together with policy sandboxes so that we can be a bit more proactive when it comes to new technologies entering different countries from a policy and practice perspective. The other thing I wanted to highlight also, governments around the world, they are now thinking of procuring differently or buying differently. In the past, when governments procure technology, because it's a big project, a couple of $1 million, it takes 2 years to procure. By the time you procure the technology, the questions or the problems have changed and the technology may be obsolete. So now governments around the world are thinking of what we call co-creating. So looking at funding the proof of concept, so you don't just award to one vendor, we award to a couple of vendors, co-create the prototype, then the most successful prototype, it's scaled up in a way. Okay, so there's a sort of a procurement rethink around the world. Recently, in one of our policy innovation lab classes, we were working with the government of Mongolia, just in this area of procuring differently, especially for healthcare technology. Then I think the other wave that is coming around the world is how can we use research funding to fund implementation. Because most of the time, research funding goes to universities. And think about it, what's the KPI of universities? KPI of universities typically is publications and patents. While I think that publications and patents are innovative, I would argue that's not innovation because it doesn't lead to innovative solutions on the ground. So I think that's the gap sometimes. And usually, research funding would fund only up to the prototype, but not the implementation. Increasingly around the world, Singapore included, they're thinking of channeling the research funding, not just to fund the prototype, but to fund the implementation gap. Because that's what matters, that last mile implementation. If you don't scale it up properly, it doesn't become an innovative solution that makes a difference to you and I. Just one final point. I think when we do this kind of stuff, things are fast moving, AI, blockchain, we always find a skills gap. Okay, so that's why at the Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, we have signed a collaborative agreement with LinkedIn, with different government agencies and with training providers to try to understand for each sector what's the supply and demand of skill sets needed today and tomorrow. Right now, people have no view, only anecdotal information about what skills are in demand and skills that are, that are high in supply. What is important is not to understand, say, these are 10 skills that are needed, but among the 10 skills, what's the top skill in demand that's low in supply? Then when I have funding, I will just hone in on that top skill. And we are using LinkedIn's data to try to understand movement and what skills are high in demand, low in supply, especially for healthcare. And this is quite critical for sort of jobs adjacency as well. Because if I'm in this job, I want to change job, which is the job that I can change to that's least painful for training. Okay, so if you're interested in this project, keep in touch with me. We aim to make the sort of findings open so that when you could even look at the skills that personally, your skills, what are those, the jobs that you're aspiring to, what are high in demand, low in supply, and how you could move towards those jobs. Okay, so that's the summary of what we are talking about. But the key point really is that technology is not just the science of it, but it is the art of implementation. With the science and art, that's where you have successful innovations that make a difference to you and I. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Ruben. Now you know why he's one of my favorite lecturers. And he gets away because without PowerPoint, we have two ladies there to help him summarize. So he again predicted that long-term planning. Okay, next we have Craig, and we'd like to thank Craig for flying into Singapore from Switzerland to share with us his views of, as a VC, how open innovation has actually disrupted. Okay, a very overused word. But in Europe, what has been happening there, and why is it here in Singapore, and what is AO Foundation all about? So, please, Craig.
Thank you, Kelvin, and thank you for the opportunity to join this distinguished panel. I came here all planned out with what I wanted to talk about today with regards to my field, which is surgery, and specifically musculoskeletal surgery, orthopedics, trauma, spine surgery, and so on. And I wanted to spend some time talking about how we apply open innovation in my organization, as well as give you some insight into some of the technologies that we see in the pipeline today and that are going to take things forward for us. Until I got on the flight over here, and obviously to pass the time, I flicked through some movies, looking for something to while away the hours. And that, for a moment, I was quite surprised with what I found. That changed everything. So how many of you here have seen this movie that came out earlier this year, Black Panther, the comic book fans out there perhaps? Very intrigued to find, after all the resources that we throw into research in surgery, spinal surgery, this sort of thing, there's a scene in this movie where a character takes a bullet in his spine, and the rare or precious metal that's the center point of this story is used to miraculously cure him within 24 hours. So a very complex, a very significant piece of surgery in our world apparently can be handled in a very straightforward fashion. So that was certainly interesting to learn. I hope that one day I can come back here and perhaps we have found a solution like that, but sadly that's not the case yet, and therefore it still gives me a few things to explain to you today. So what I'd like to do is actually go back in time, firstly, with a story about arguably what I think is an early open innovation story. So if we go back to the mid part of the last century,
and we look at patients, consider patients who have been the victims of trauma, accidents and so on, broken limbs, things weren't very promising for those patients. I mean, how many people here, it'd be interesting to have a show of hands, have either experienced, suffered from a broken limb or had a family member or friend who've been in that situation? There's a few around. It will happen to a lot of us throughout our lives that will be affected in some way or other with musculoskeletal disorders. If this had happened to you back then, arguably you would have ended up in traction for perhaps several weeks, if not months. You would have been immobilized, and the chances of a decent recovery were fairly limited, as you see from the data here. Obviously, that's not the case anymore. Fortunately, things have changed significantly since then. And part of the reason for that is this group of surgeons from Switzerland, where I'm based, who founded the organization that I represent, the AO Foundation. And arguably they are among the original open innovators, practicing open innovation long before I imagine the term was known, or certainly not widely used, and certainly not a hot topic the way it is today. But through a process of open innovation, they truly revolutionized fracture care. They pioneered a new way of treating bone fractures using implants in order to secure better bone healing and in order to allow patients to be more mobile, more quickly, and ultimately have a better quality of life. And the way that they did this was indeed through partnerships and through opening up. So this is a group of practitioners, a group of surgeons. They expanded that group to their colleagues. They turned to academics with their ideas. They turned to engineering colleagues, contacts of theirs with their ideas. So we passionately believe in a new way of treating these kind of patients. But we need help. We need help to develop products around this. So that's where their engineering friends came into play. Products were developed. These were the first implants for the anatomy, plates, screws, and so on. And this really led to the birth of that part of the medical device industry. And so through this collaboration, there was a dramatic shift in the way that care for these patients was conducted. And they faced a lot of resistance, as with a lot of innovation. People thought they were crazy back then. There were many who did not agree with their ideas. But as we know today, they really pioneered something that became very widespread. So with our organization today, a few pillars to it. One is education. We reach a lot of surgeons through our education, through a lot of events that take place around the world. We put a lot of resources into R&D, and we do this through collaboration again. So we do this with industrial partners from the medical device industry. And up until now, over these past 50, 60 years, there's a huge number of healthcare professionals globally that we have been able to reach. And the result of that is that we have this network, 20,000 plus members, but a far greater number of surgeons who are affiliated to us in one way or another, but importantly, a number of industrial partners. So again, the example of open innovation coming into play a long, long time ago, and important point mentioned there is the common vision, and I think that's something I'll come back to later on, after I talk about some of the technologies we see in play today, is the importance of some of the notion of a common vision amongst partners when it comes to open innovation, and some degree of shared values, I would say as well. So the outcome is that having gone from where we were back in the mid part of the last century, today huge progress has been made, of course, in terms of recovery rates and this kind of thing from bone fractures. Having said that, though, there's still a lot of room for improvement. A quarter of us, more or less, 25% of the population will be affected by musculoskeletal disorders. It has a vast impact on society still today in terms of cost, both direct as well as indirect. Indirect costs in terms of course, the impact on society, populations, and the speed with which people recover from some of these cases. So it's a costly set of indications, and it's one where a lot of work is still needed in terms of finding further solutions, further innovation, and so on in order to improve patient care in this field. So looking to today and looking to the future, and again from the perspective of my organization, what is the approach that we take when it comes to identifying new sources of advancing patient care, of treating patients in better ways? And I would say that there are a number of ways in which we do this. We conduct significant amounts of internal R&D. You could say that's the closed innovation, if you like. That's what we're doing in-house with the people that we have, with the network that we have of surgeons. But when it comes to remaining open, just as we have been historically, work with our partner companies remains very important, taking a proactive approach towards intellectual property. So taking very much a strategic view, looking at where we can acquire intellectual property that fits with our strategy and so on. Perhaps unusually for a foundation such as ours, investing, and this is what I'll come to in a moment, so taking on the role of a VC and trying to enhance that ecosystem in terms of reaching startups as well. And in addition, looking extensively at licensing agreements with third parties and potentially creating spin-offs with other groups. So what I'd like to do is show you a couple of examples of the technologies that we're working with today and that we think are going to play an important role going forward. And the first is around simulation and particularly medical education. Simulation is very commonplace, of course, within the aviation industry. Best known there. After all, who wants a trainee pilot taking you on your next journey? I imagine there aren't many who have put their hand up for that. Well, the same probably applies to surgery, and yet the historical model has been see one, do one, teach one. Now, hopefully, all of those of you here who have suffered a fracture and so on, as you indicated earlier, you've no doubt been in the hands of good surgeons, but nonetheless, historically, that has been the model, and that's something we want to change, because this is the starting point of the patient care continuum, if you like. So an example here of one company that we're partnering with called Futurenow, who, and there's a little video coming here showing the technology they're developing for use with head-mounted displays, virtual reality technology that will enable the learners to use, firstly, images from patients, so using patient data, converting that into 3D models, and then using that in the virtual OR, which you see here, in order to practice the procedures that they will engage in. And this is what we want to see more of, and certainly what we're keen to support within our field is that surgeons on a much wider scale have the opportunity to do this. So it goes beyond the hundreds of courses that we have every year where people can meet us face to face and learn from other surgeons, but they can actually carry out these procedures before they're in the operating room. So we'll just see this video run through. Do we have any sound on the videos? Okay, for the next ones that are coming up in particular. So that's one of the companies that we're working with. You see here in this photo another example of a simulator. This is something a little more hardware specific as opposed to software focused, but there are a number of ways in which simulation will play an important role. Next, I would turn to preoperative planning software, and again, it's the use of 3D imaging, or rather the use of imaging converted into 3D graphics in order to enable surgeons to plan. This is a step forward, I would say, from the step on in the continuum from the educational perspective, but it's rather as the surgeon is planning a specific software. Again, this is another company that we're partnering with and developing with them.
Each year, the number of orthopedic surgeries exceeds 6 million cases. This number is growing annually, caused by several aspects, such as sport injuries or car accidents, resulting in joint problems and trauma. Surgical errors occur daily, and 60% of them could be avoided with an efficient surgical planning tool. Let me introduce you to Dr. John and Dr. Simon. They're both orthopedic surgeons, just like you. Surgeons don't go to the operating room planning to fail, but often they fail by not completing a comprehensive planning process. But that's about to change. Dr. Simon only uses traditional images to do his planning, so he has difficulties understanding the real patient's problem, taking measurements, and selecting the materials needed for his case. He's unable to make a full preview of the surgery, causing a lot of surprises in the operating room. On the other hand, Dr. John uses PeakMed, an extremely powerful and easy-to-use surgical planning software tool. So he's able to practice his surgery anywhere and focus on the most important thing, the patient. Using the latest 3D technology, he can analyze the patient's lesion and add material templates, decreasing the probability of a bad surprise during the actual surgery. And while Dr. Simon is still struggling with the planning, Dr. John has the peace of mind to perform the surgery accurately and efficiently, saving time and money. Dr. John now has much more free time to enjoy some family moments. Welcome to Peak Med. Less surprises, less trouble.
So another example there of a company that we're now partnering with, and I think technology like that will also be used ultimately for data analytics, something which my colleagues here have referred to earlier, as we get a sufficient amounts of data applied through a system like this, and that will enable more predictive healthcare as well within our field. Finally, as I'm conscious of the clock ticking, I'm going to show you a company that's now part of our investment portfolio. So this was a startup, so different angle we've taken to collaborate with this company, using augmented reality in order to give the surgeon, to all intents and purposes, X-ray vision. So final short video to give you a little taste of what Augmetics does.
X-Vision, it was pretty fancy when I first saw it because it was the first time you could really see three-dimensionally through a phantom or fake spine.
I was pretty surprised at how fast I was able to adopt the techniques with the X-Vision in the short period of time that I used it. Typically what we have to do is we have to look away from where we're working, but this has all of the image-guided information directly in front of you within the goggles that you're wearing while you're placing the instrumentation.
As I turned my head and looked like a normal person would look at a patient, I could actually see the details of this three-dimensional anatomy basically through the patient.
This gives you added confidence, I think, and real-time confidence that you're placing the instrumentation in the correct location, and I think that's really pretty cool.
Imagine if you were driving a vehicle and you have GPS, which is what image guidance is. Would you want the GPS intuitively displayed translucently onto your windshield so that you're still always looking at the road? Or versus what you do now where you're looking at a GPS down on a console or on your phone?
So the X-Vision setup with an optics onlay is really no different than wearing some type of shield, which is often what surgeons do. This was actually lightweight and easy to use and was translucent. You can see through the actual image.
Anything that improves your surgical efficiency in many ways is going to be better.
If we can increase the information we gather, this is all going to lead to efficiency, this is going to lead to better outcomes, and it's going to lead to better safety.
The number one benefit for X-Vision is that you are always looking at the patient. You're never distracted from the patient.
The patient's in the operating room for less time, which means that it's safer, and it's also easier for the surgeon.
If we take this technology at face value right now, it's a game changer.
So the final example I'll just quickly jump onto is the use of sensor technology. This has been touched on earlier here as well, and we had a session on sensor technology, of course, this morning. It's not just about socks such as that, but it's about both external sensors in that case, as well as internal sensors that could be used on implants and so on. And I think the key thing there is bringing tremendous cost savings to healthcare systems, as well as empowering patients by giving them more control over their rehabilitation. So to wrap up, I touched earlier on things like vision and values. I think it goes without saying that a collaborative approach is key when it comes to open innovation, certainly within our field and our experience. But I'd add also the network effect, if you like, so the exponential advances that can be made by just bringing larger and larger groups of key players together that do have a shared vision. And finally, I mentioned there smart money. So for us, when we look at investing, there's a lot of capital out there, and it's a good idea. Good management teams of startups and so on, I don't think have too much trouble necessarily attracting capital. But our focus here is really on bringing our money and our capital to where we can make a difference. And I think that's an important part of our open innovation approach. So on that note, just to finish off, I'd say that within our fields of surgery, obviously big advances over previous decades, but I think way more potential to come in the years ahead through these kind of technologies. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Craig. Okay, can we show the slide on? Okay, so we have some questions already. I think by now you know we have this interactive question and answer website called Slido. So that's where we post all these questions. We have about 15 minutes, so I'm going to use the time to ask different actors here, VCs, the public policy, the academia, as well as a practicing doctor about some of these questions. So I think the most popular one is for Dr. Marcus. How did you overcome the chicken and egg situation for Medilog? Hospitals want patients to use the platform, while patients want hospitals. So, wow, this is not easy to answer, but please try.
So I think there has to be two approaches, right? One from the base up and one from the top down. So from top down, you need buy-in from senior management. You need management to understand that this is going to be the next frontier of healthcare, and that centralized systems have their inherent flaws that, regardless of how much redundancy you build into it, will not be as secure as a blockchain, will not have inherent principles like auditability, will not have data provenance that's as strong as in a blockchain. So I think the key is to reach out to hospitals and form partnerships. At the same time, connect with regulators who must then understand these intricacies, and for hospitals to implement these systems, these blockchain systems, into their existing EHR systems. And secondly, for patients, I think it's quite simple. If I told you that, if you sign on to this platform, we'll be able to offer you predictive insights or precision medicine that's otherwise going to be very hard or very expensive to procure, that would be a very good incentive for patients to sign on.
I'm happy
Tamsin,
to
you
jump
want
in
to
and
say
add.
something? Please.
I don't know the answer to Medilot, but I think it's a lot about creating the value proposition that resonates with the people you're trying to engage. Because all too often we have people come saying, I've got a great idea, and we say, well, how do you know it's great? Well, we've tested it. Yeah, but who on? And these can be people who have a lot of experience, but they come with a technology or a data solution. They don't really know who it's designed for. Or they have a use case, but they've never really tried applying it. So what's the value proposition for the doctor or the hospital or the patient? And that's why I'm a firm believer. I see one of the questions is about design thinking. Well, I'm a firm believer in design thinking and human-centric design. So when we bring that human-centric design, it allows us to work out how our technology resonates with that user, and that helps them to buy into it. So you probably have done that anyway, but I think when we're going forward and looking at these opportunities, what is it I have that really will help you solve your problem? And we see an increasing trend of impact design, so understanding user needs. How do we design around impact rather than, hey, I've got a product and I want it to be funded and I want to operationalize it and so on. So to me, that kind of comes onto that question about design thinking as well.
I'm tempted to ask Craig also, when you invest and look at, you mentioned about team, how strong they are, how their technologies perform in some of the trials. Do you have this dilemma in investment, whether it's chicken or egg, which one will come first, demand or supply?
I think for us, we look at it from a slightly different perspective, which is there, besides looking at the team, of course, which is very much about need. So it's about rather from the demand side. So what is the clinical need? And then from the economic perspective, what is the business case for that? But it's going to be driven by that. We're looking for clinical needs within our field. It's got to answer a clear use case.
So what's the biggest investment you have put in so far and then it didn't work?
Say that again?
The biggest investment that as a VC have put money in and you guessed wrongly, the chicken, the chicken didn't lay the eggs. Yeah?
Fortunately, I can sit here at the moment and say, so far, so good. If we come back and do this again in future, I might have a clearer view on that, but early days.
Okay, thank you. Ruben, you have a question about design thinking and healthcare landscape. I know our topic is on open innovations, and I would like to sort of prompt you a bit more on open innovations and design thinking, how it opens up mind about innovations. Yeah?
Thank you for the question. I think it's an important one. I think from a design thinking and behavioral insights perspective, it's really to find what are simple solutions that can make a big impact. In the innovation space, what is something simple that you can do that is innovative, doesn't cost much, easy to implement, that can really make a big difference. So one example, there are several examples that come to mind, but I'll just mention one. So in our hospitals, we increasingly have dementia wards. So some people have comorbid conditions, meaning maybe they have cancer and dementia. So if they have cancer and dementia, then instead of going to the cancer ward, they would be actually in the dementia ward. One of the pain points in the dementia ward is that people just leave the ward and it's very hard to track them. So design thinking, they were thinking about what were different ways. Maybe you put a tracker, we put video analytics and stuff like that. But ultimately, they found a very simple solution, which is at the door. This was Kudekwa Hospital. So they found that at the door of the hospital, of the dementia ward, you just paint a bookshelf on the door. Somehow when dementia patients walk towards the door and they see a bookshelf, they end up not leaving, they go back to their beds. Okay, of course, some will be very frustrated because they want to get the books, out of the painted bookshelf. yeah, but the frustrations are managed in a different way. But what I'm trying to say is that design thinking actually crowdsource very simple solutions and make a big impact. So I think for innovation, sometimes we try to find what's something simple or what's something parsimonious or simple, most simple solution to solve the problem. So I think that's something to think about for sort of innovation. Do you want me to give my thoughts to the second question? Okay. So the second question was about report cards and stuff like that to measure the impact. I think monitoring and evaluation is very critical. So international organizations like the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, these days when they do a project, they make sure that 5 to 10% of the budget is allocated to monitoring and evaluation. I think that's very important. Sometimes when we do the projects, we put in a lot of money on building the prototype and implementation, but we don't allocate budget for the evaluation, and we hope that it will be done. It can never be done if you don't allocate time and money to it. So I think the first thing to do is to, yes, there are all these indicators, but you need to allocate budget and time to the evaluation. Because if you don't evaluate, you don't know what works, you don't know what to scale. Okay, then you have lots of prototypes, lots of things, but you don't know what to scale. So I think that's the first point. I think the second point is when we think about evaluation and a report card, sometimes typically we think about cost, but some things cannot really, it's hard to be quantified. Like let's say patient is not just the physical recovery, but really mental well-being. All this mental, psychological well-being, how they feel, how they think is very important. Because there are a lot of studies showing that mental factors or psychological factors can have impact to physical health. For example, several studies have showed that people who think positively about aging lived 8 years longer than those who think negatively about aging. Controlling for, adjusting for effects of whether you are rich, poor, male, female, even then you see that survival advantage. Underscoring the importance of psychological factors. So sometimes when we look at evaluation in the report card, it is important also to think about mental health and psychological factors. I think that's very critical because it's really a start of the pathway to recovery. People who think positive, they tend to adhere better to their medication and so on. So that's the second point. I think the third point is that when we think about evaluation, we shouldn't just think about what are the factors to evaluate, but we need to think about the pathways to recovery and think about evaluating at different points of the pathway. Because if we can evaluate at different points of the pathway, we know what leads to recovery and where we can intervene.
I think I'll tackle the second question. Will the advancement of health data gathering lead to patients being overreactive of their health? Well, so I think we're actually seeing a change, and I'm sure all of us know this, that medical paternalism, which is you doing exactly what your doctor tells you to, is very soon going to be a thing of the past, right? Nowadays, it's not uncommon for patients to seek second opinions elsewhere. And really to do that, you need to be able to provide your healthcare provider with your whole health story. So we are really thinking about data gathering in a sense, when we're talking about advancing data gathering, you're saying that we want to be able to access your whole health story, your whole longitudinal health story seamlessly. And I think that's a good thing for patients, right? You want to be able to bring your health data with you, go to another country, and have that doctor be able to know exactly what happened to you in the past. And I think the way it will affect local practices and patient interaction is that, number one, it will encourage patients to be more, to take ownership of their data, and also, and also for younger patients, they already know this and they already want this. We have patients coming to us who want sometimes detailed medical reports, not only for insurance, but for their own educational purposes. They want to know a bit more about what's happening to them. And I think having this system in place to allow this will encourage patients to take care of their health a bit more.
I feel like I keep jumping in on you as well, but I entirely agree, because I think when I read that question, overreactive of their health, well, actually, I think the big problem we face is that most people don't care enough about their health.
Exactly.
We care about our health when it's gone wrong, and then we outsource it to a clinician to fix us. So one of our big missions there. So to me, yes, there are some risks to think about, but actually, in terms of patient empowerment, I think a phenomenal thing if people are actually looking at their own data more and realize other people can see it. So maybe it will help we have the whole 3 Beyonds policy movement here. Maybe it really will help play a role in terms of empowering patients to care more about their health.
I'll just add another perspective on that, which is knowing full well from the surgeons, the many surgeons we work with, and I think also the wider medical community for that matter, they've anyway had to grapple with the fact for almost a couple of decades now, that so much information is available to patients, obviously online, and we can all research every disorder, disease, and any other problem that we like. And it's not just information, it's also misinformation. So I would hope that this now advancement of gathering data is actually going to bring more objectivity to the situation and more transparency, and therefore hopefully improve, if anything, that physician-patient relationship.
Yeah, but can you share with us in Europe what is the status now about data records, digital records in particular, being shared? Is it been progressed much faster over the years with blockchain and technologies that make things more transparent?
We're not there yet. It's on its way, but we're not there yet. I think what we see, which is the same across at least many parts of the world when it comes to electronic health records, medical records, and so on, is a very fragmented market and fragmented systems, and countries, big and large, grappling with this challenge of how to harmonize, standardize to a certain extent within their own borders, let alone across borders. So it's very much a work in progress.
So, Ruben, what do you think? Smart nation and data transparency, do you think we are getting there, or there are still challenges that we need to jump over?
I think we are getting there. I think open sharing of data is quite important because data really has a multiplier effect. It's not like money, right? If I have $1, I give you $1. You're richer for $1, but I'm poorer by $1. But data sharing is very different because if I share data with you, you have insights, I have insights. Together, we are richer for the insights. So I think, in Singapore, we have data.gov.sg. So I think that's a move in the right direction. But some researchers feel that we can go one step further because the data are not granular enough. So I think increasingly we are seeing governments becoming sort of the trusted source for data sharing. So our central bank, for example, has done a tremendous job because when they look at pairing fintech startups with big banks with issues, with problems that they want to solve for startups, MES actually, or Monetary Authority of Singapore, Central Bank of Singapore, actually hosts the data for them to work, for the startups to work on the data from the big banks. I think increasingly we can see governments playing that role of being the trusted source for data so that different players can work on it.
All right. Thank you. Okay, we have time for maybe 2 questions from the floor. Anybody who would like to raise your hand and ask our panelists here? Any questions? No? Okay, they'll move on to the next question about Tamsin, IP sharing as a barrier. I think, this often comes up when you talk about open innovation. Is IP still something that we have to pay money for, or you see that, in our field, things are moving so fast that there's no point trying to protect the IP. So you get a lot of, design thinking workshops and consultancies for big corporates. Are they more open, and how do they think of IP today?
It's a really horrible question, that one. I'm happy to share it. However, my view is, so there is someone from my team here who'll sit and heard me say this a million times, who cares, yeah? Sometimes we use IP to hide behind. We say, oh, man, I need to own this. I need to keep this secret. I need to have everything that comes out of it. As soon as you go to market, then everyone else is busy copying you and building on that and making it even better. So actually, why not just collaborate up front? So that's not true for every case, and I'm being slightly flippant. However, it's brilliant that we all build on each other's inventions. So I think IP is a tricky one. I actually don't know the answer. The only way that we tackle it in our project is we agree up front, even as crudely as we can, what we want to get out of the project. And we're from the National University of Singapore. We don't look to make money, okay? We look to build capabilities and enhance knowledge. Great, our role is easier. But we just need to have that very honest discussion up front. Partner with people you're not in competition with. That said, I partner with other universities as well, so I'm breaking all the rules here. I think it's about that we're in a much more open world. Digitalization has democratized things in a very different way, so we can't keep hiding in these legal barriers and silos anymore, but that's just my slightly different route. I think you might have a different one.
Right. What do you think?
I was going to say, I fully agree that it's brilliant and indeed inspiring if we can convince organizations, partners we work with to share IP. I agree as well that we're obviously in a more open world, so we can hope this is coming. Having said that, I don't want to think about the number of hours I've spent sitting in our lawyer's legal counsel's office staring at IP clauses in contracts. So it's a thorny issue, and it will always be, to a certain extent, a thorny issue. But we need to find mechanisms to resolve it in each case.
Yeah, but as a VC, you will put money if there's IP, right? So is this changing?
Of course, IP is one important factor when it comes to looking at the targets that we evaluate, and we will put money into these startups, but we want to make sure, having said that they have a secure IP position. So I'm probably now getting at risk of contradicting myself, but yeah, it remains a difficult issue.
Yeah. Marcus, how many IP you all have in Medilog? You want to share a bit of that views?
So the interesting thing about technology IPs is that they're not exactly that useful. The moment you put up your system architecture up, it's so easy for someone else to just, take it, replicate it, and even build on it. So actually, we are applying for one IP only. The rest is know-how. I think that's a better way of approaching it. We will have GitHub, and some parts of the project will be open source.
Okay, we have run out of time, but again, I'd like to give everyone a chance to have one or two sentences about this topic, open innovations in healthcare. Starting with Greg, you want to say something?
Well, I think I'd finish by again reiterating the excitement that certainly I have, passion, interest, and also speaking for my organization and the people we work with about what's going to be possible in future. We don't know how things are going to play out with one or other technology that's relevant to our field, but the potential is there, and I think there are going to be huge advances that we can make, particularly through taking this open approach.
So for me, I think for open innovation to take place, we need to have the attitude of ask for forgiveness rather than permission. Okay, I think that attitude would really spur innovation. Thank you.
Very good. I think mine is around designing for impact. I think open innovation works best when we're designing for impact rather than how to get my product to market. So that's really, I guess, my parting shot.
Right. I think open innovation is only possible with a collaborative effort, and the talk about IP really is a very pertinent one that I think we'll have to tackle in future.
Okay, thank you very much, audiences. Maybe you can give a hand of applause, right, to all. They have worked very hard. So we, in our own way, NES Enterprise is going to give you some tokens for all your hard work.
Might seem